thanking you for this invitation, for being able to see the Liberec for the first time in my life. I was a little bit surprised when I got the invitation to talk about the idea of the center and periphery. Of course, I can only talk about my work, or our work. But also this idea of the center and periphery is not something that really appealed to us, or not something that we felt very comfortable with this Peter's presentation before, of course. It's a little bit more clear to me what you meant when organizing, and I see that you did a lot of air miles to compile the material for the research. Basically, for us, this idea seemed a little bit outdated. This is why I also put forward the internet address of our office, because this fact has in fact changed a lot the way in which we might think about the center and periphery today. Also, the idea of regional language or regionalist attitude is something we really never felt very comfortable with. Of course, we are very much aware of where we come from, and we are very much aware of, no, we are not aware of where we are going, but let's say we think that we know where we come from, and it influences our work a lot. We had always a problem with this regionalist attitude. But the idea of this existence of a place that Peter was proposing in his presentation is something that maybe appealed to us much more. To that, maybe I would like to add just one more word, let's say, which maybe more characterizes our work if we try to present it, and we have been using this very often. It's the idea of conditions, and the idea of conditioning of the things that condition the work of architecture, or the work of an architect today. And we have been giving titles to our lectures for very many years, exactly the same title with all different lectures, which was called All We Find Are Conditions, where we basically tried to explain the diversity of our work and the diversity of approaches to ourselves, but also to the others, as basically a necessity of, as architects, to react to every particular condition in a particular way, in a specific way, geared to that particular condition. These conditions, of course, could also take into account classically put forward context or stuff like that, but were also social and political and economical very often, and in a sense determine the projects, or even let's say familial, but determine the projects in sometimes in a much stronger way than the actual physical context, or the actual idea of belonging to a particular place in a physical sense or geographical sense. I'm going to start, as Carmen was there before me, and I'm going to show her an image of a Catalan artist. This is an artist that we admire a lot, but it's not here because we admire him, because I just wanted to show you the work. It's an artist whose name is Ignacio Bani, who cuts out the skies from the newspapers, from Spanish newspapers, over a year and archives them. So he basically takes out the sky from every event that is published in the newspaper and gives it a title and a date and the date of publication. And this is somehow how we feel also a little bit about this idea of conditional music. Of course, I'm abusing this work for illustration purposes. That there is this something that underlines all of our work, but it appears in very different guises in all different places. So like the skies that are the backgrounds of our lives every day can differ in very many ways, from geographies to times of day and to locations. And talking about locations, of course, as I said, we think that we know where we come from. We have been practicing with my partner, Matija Berg, we have been practicing architecture for the past 15 years in Ljubljana, Slovenia. And this is the location, as some of you might know, Ljubljana is one of these fresh countries. It's only 21 or 22 years old. And it's stuck somewhere in between Austria, Italy, Croatia, and Hungary. And basically, this is, I'm not from there. I'm actually also an expat in Slovenia, so I'm a little bit peripheral also in relation to my location of my office. But if you draw a 600-kilometer radius around around the city where we sit, it also gives you the idea of the kind of influences that have been happening over this territory in the past centuries. So Slovenia exists only 21 years, but in fact the cultural and political and economical influences of the surrounding region have been happening for very many centuries before. We are also conditioned by the place where we work. This is Ljubljana. It's somewhat bigger than Liberec, probably a few times bigger than Liberec. It's also kind of a very interesting mix of medieval city, Baroque city, and then with some really some spectacular and some very good modernist interventions. Slovenia, as a country where we come from, is very famous for this landscape. Every time I talk to someone, they talk about the landscape, and of course, as working in the office, you don't get to see so much of that landscape. But my partner's mother and father, they are retired architects, so they can enjoy the landscape. So Slovenia is famous for that. We also carry that in ourselves. Slovenia is also famous, or there are some specific, let's say, modes of architectural expression that have developed over centuries, and this is one of those examples. The hay racks near the lake of Bohinj, somewhere near the, one of the houses that I'm also going to show. These are used for, they're actually houses, they look like houses, but they're only used for drying grass in the end of the summer. There's also one thing that we all share, and most people here, is the destruction. The destruction of European landscape, both cultural and physical, is something that is imminent to all of us. So I think that in that sense, none of us are either central or peripheral. The destruction in the last 20 years of the European landscape and the European space is something that we all share. What we don't share, but in fact we share very much with the Czech people here, but not with the rest, is also that Slovenia is one of the countries which has in its foundation of its cultural being, let's say, one particular architect. It's Jože Plečnik, and who actually was working first in Prague and did a lot of stuff in Czech Republic as well, but basically came back to Slovenia and created Ljubljana that you see today. Today, when you walk through Ljubljana, practically 70% of the city has been in one way or another touched and redefined by the work of Plečnik. Of course, this is the most prominent building per se, but there are a lot of other interventions in the city. This is the first building also that has the Slovenian nation in its title, Slovenian National Library, built just before, or finished just before the Second World War. His work is, let's say, in a way, something that influences us a lot, because his attempt to synthesize the influences of the world that was surrounding him in the early 20th century until, let's say, the Second World War. And this is one such example. This is our favorite project. This is a carpenter's building in the cemetery of Žale. This is on the top floor where they basically dry the wood for the caskets. Shows you the range and the span of influences which we somehow feel lucky to be able to enjoy, that Plečnik introduced. So if I would cut the top part of this building and show you the bottom, you could easily talk about the northern influences and about the Leverens and about whatever. And if I would cut the bottom part and show you the upper part, we could talk about the Byzantine, we could talk about... so in a way, this synthetic approach and this kind of openness to outside influences is something that, even though we talk about periphery, we should never forget. He did some projects which were very social. This is a housing under the common roof, the proposal for, of course, not a left-wing project, but a deeply Catholic project of a city providing a huge roof where all the people could basically build their own houses underneath it, so a kind of an attempt at social housing, a very early one, here used by a famous Slovene artist. Of course, Slovenia didn't only have Plečnik, there were students of Plečnik because he started the School of Architecture, who went on to work for Corbusier and took over the school after that. And I think this is maybe a little bit a parallel to the people that have started also the school here. This is Edo Glavnikar, an architect from the 60s, 70s and 80s, a student of both Plečnik and Corbusier, who basically introduced modernism to Slovenia. This modernism was in a kind of much let's say, softer one, already developed modernism, which owed much more influences to people like Aalto than to Corbusian influences. But these two buildings never finished. These black things are basically hasty endings that he had to devise himself, were meant to be the headquarters of the Communist Party. One of them, and the other one, the headquarters of the syndicates, I think. Today they are the headquarters of the largest Slovene bank. And the political aspects of our existences may change over time, sometimes even drastically, but the architecture, unfortunately or fortunately, is there to stay. So the permanence of architecture is something also that has to be taken into account. This is the moment when Slovenia ascended to the European Union some years ago, 7 or 8 or 10 years ago. And of course the same buildings that were built for the Communist Party are the background for the celebrations of the kind of the big joining into the kind of completely different political order. Slovenia also had very, I'm sounding a little bit like a tourist guide now, had a lot of very, very specific architectures that are not so very famous. This is one of those. This is an architect whose name is Otto Njugovic, who built only 6 or 7 buildings. And this is maybe the most paradigmatic one of those. It's a roof which covers some archaeological excavations somewhere near the Croatian border. And in a sense, let's say, is very much what Ken Frampton was at a certain point in history addressing as critical regionalism, the ability to kind of merge together the modernist strive for, in this case, structure, and then the very strong influences of regional traditions into a kind of a coherent whole. The way this building looked, well, building construction looked a few years ago, also gives you a very good illustration of the kind of atmosphere and relation that contemporary Slovene culture has to architecture. It's not easy to practice architecture in Slovenia. For very many years there has been very little respect for the role of an architect in society. I think this is something that we also commonly share with Czech Republic. I think you're still probably not out of that period, at least judging by my 1.5 year ride from Prague to Liberec. This is, let's say, we did a kind of architect's appeal, so finally this building is standing up again due to an effort of us and the other architectural offices. But it gives you the idea of where we actually work. So all of these I call conditions, and all of these and this idea of conditions helps me also explain some of our work. The condition of me working with Mattia, not with the zebra is just a prop. He's much younger than me, he's a totally different person. He is Slovene, I am not. The condition of working in our office, as Karla was showing, our office is an abandoned department store, and from the 60s, a very good project, which you cannot really see on this picture, but and the idea of working with a group of people, we have a very small office, and we work with a group of people from different cultural backgrounds. Our office is more than 60% foreign, so in that sense also very specific to Slovene conditions, and in a way peripheral also in relation to what is happening in Slovenia. And then another thing that can never be forgotten, and I'm borrowing another, these artworks are in fact coming directly from my working space or my living room, in fact. Another wallpaper photograph. It's a work of a Korean artist, Doho Su, which illustrates something that we as architects should always somehow also, not somehow, but always bear in mind. This very fuzzy image of a kind of a pinkish surface. Once blown up and once you come very near it, is actually consisting out of all the faces of Doho Su's childhood and all of the people that went to his high school in this particular case. So in that sense, this kind of huge cloud, which at the same time focuses on a particular individual and a particular person, is something that I think pieces of architecture should never forget. For this presentation today, I'm a little bit handicapped because I can't shift back and forth, so I'm just going to have to stick to the first part. I wanted to actually show a little bit the our peripheral work, but not our work, well, some of it is of course on periphery, on physical periphery of the cities of Slovenia. Slovenia doesn't really have a periphery because it's so small that you can basically cross it 45 minutes one direction and 45 minutes the other direction, so there is no sense of periphery in that sense. But of course, I also chose some projects which I think are peripheral to our practice today. We are today, fortunately or unfortunately, dealing with much bigger projects, but over the years, over the past 15 years, we've done a series of small projects and small houses. So I'm actually showing you a span of works that we have done over time. And a lot of these small projects actually dealt with the idea that we tried to show on this diagram, with the idea of the changes that are happening within within the individual house and the changes that happen in relation between the house and the outside world, and the kind of social changes that are incredibly influencing also the way we live today. Now I'm going to try to be very quick, but starting still with the first project that we ever did. And it's a small house that we did for an engineer who works for us, who bought a very small plot of land of 500 square meters somewhere on the outskirts of Ljubljana, somewhere on the Ljubljana periphery, which has been in the 1960s and 70s overbuilt with buildings built without any building permissions. This site has this fantastic view, but it's in the north, so it will never get the sun on this side. And this is the surroundings. On the south it has this kind of neighbors, and the neighbors, of course, when you go today to ask the people in the local community what kind of building am I allowed to build on this plot, they tell you you have to build something like the neighbors. But the neighbors are completely illegal. They have started their life as illegal constructions, which have, through abolition, become our new context. This is why the idea of context is not really so very accurate at most points. So within this context, we try to create a building that is its own fence on a very small plot of land that enjoys the views, but also tries to catch the sun. To transform something which is expected from you as an architect into something that is, of course, still within the rules of the expected, but bringing out another set of qualities. We create a living room which works as a kind of periscope that catch the southern sun and then direct the views of the north, but it's also lifted on the first floor because our friends who are commissioning us don't want to have really a garden because they always live in a skyscraper. We designed the ground floor as a bedroom area, which is extremely small, more influenced by the idea of a ryokan, where all the rooms can be packed in the morning so you can have the whole surface for the children to play. And the upper floor is a different sensory experience and spatial experience of having a kind of a loft space which opens to the views. And the building is in fact a kind of a decomposed idea of the neighboring buildings, clad in wood, catching the sun on the side where it has these ugly neighbors, not having the views of them, even creating a provisional garage space. And then lifting the garden so that you don't need to have the fences, so that it can all become one huge working surface for the whole family. And then the series of doors that slide in the morning and open up the entire ground floor. The staircase is a point where the entire spatial, let's say, experience of the building is going to shift into something that is much more open and much wider, more like a parcel of land than a room in itself, facing these views to the outside. The roof of the bedrooms is, of course, going to become the new garden or the new terrace of the house. This is the first project that we did, and then we started, in fact, through this last 12 years, let's say, 10 years. This building was 10 years old on the New Year's Eve this year. We actually did a series of similar experiments, always dealing with the idea, sometimes with the very notion of landscape, sometimes with the notion of programs, sometimes with the notion of organizational models of the families, and always trying to also address wider issues, like in this case the issue of transforming the expected volume of something that should colonize all of our periphery into something that has to do much more with the idea of the buildings which are integrated into the landscape of this kind of, as Carmen is pointing out, these kind of buildings which are used as farm buildings rather than the, so this is a small hill overlooking suburbia of Ljubljana. This is we always have pictures, also the previous pictures are on the first day we visit the site. We think they're very important because they give you this kind of innocent view and of the site. Afterwards you start working with the site, you in a way destroy it because you always have different sets of opinions. So this is the first moment that we see the site. It's in this little garden that we have to build the building. And this is something that we try to do. We try to transform the landscape also while creating a building, so that there will be these two conditions, the condition of the patio house at the bottom in this carved out hill, and then the condition of the living room sitting on top of the landscape and overlooking the surroundings. The diagram where we try to explain to the clients how we actually want to do this thing, and to convince them that they have to use thousands of tons of concrete to achieve it. And the section of the house once it is built. In fact, when you look at the site from the air, it looks like nothing has changed, except there is one house which spans edge to edge from the site. But in fact, the bottom is the patio building, and the top floor is completely glazed in volume. I'm showing deliberately this building as the previous one because they're in fact a pair. The materiality and the idea of condensing all of the technological layers in building, much like in a tent, into just one surface, is something that we tried to achieve. And the house, on the day when it was finally finished, now it's, of course, the garden is back and it's much greener today. The way the landscape is in fact carved and transformed in order to allow for this idea of a living room sitting on top of the hill and overlooking the space downstairs and the space upstairs overlooking the surrounding hills. So this is actually maybe 10 or 15 minutes from Ljubljana. In some ways, sometimes you can deal with the place. Like in this case, I think we dealt a lot with the idea of landscape and the idea of use and abuse of landscape. Sometimes there is no such thing. Sometimes, especially these peripheral conditions are kind of completely bizarrely characterless. So there's nothing to, in fact, take into your project. This is one such occasion. This is 25 kilometers from Ljubljana. Scroll that I showed you is in fact starting in Ljubljana and continuing for another 30 kilometers. This is why I say we never have really a center and periphery. It's just maybe a continuous center, but I think also continuous periphery. And here we have a site which is just 50 by 20 meters. That's it. No? So what do you deal with? It's just a flat piece of grass. What can be constructed on this? But we also have a family, and in this case we have a family. There are also friends of ours who didn't have children for 20 years, and all of a sudden, through miracles of science, ended up having 4 children over 2 years. So these 4 children are in fact much more important, I think, context, because the house is a celebration of this life. Otherwise, you don't build a house. The house is about life, no? So it's much more of a context than the actual site. So what we try to do, we try to reorganize this 50 meters by 20 meters into something that would allow them to enjoy this life together, this newly found life together on this territory. Much like, this is a political project, of course, but I'm just using it as a reference, of the kind of spatial reference. Much like this project, where the idea of a habitable supermarket, or the kind of space which doesn't have so much character but allows for social conditions to be established within it is created. And this is the building. Once we finished it, we were accused that we were doing a car showroom, a fitness building, and then finally, these people actually live there. The building is 50 meters long, it's the size of the site, and it's 5 meters wide, and it's a continuous space of living room and parents' bedroom and 4 children's bedrooms, where each space retains a small privacy, it's like in a boat, but also opens up to a common and communal space, so that through glass elevations we can actually take over the entire site. When you do a building site, the building site reflects the idea. The entire site is the building site. The construction, the building, which actually has huge cantilevers because it is southern elevation, so it works very well with the climatic control, where we can actually then use the very ordinary glass. Each member of the family has only one door to go out from his own space. And these are the wooden doors that allow them to recognize their own point in this huge anonymous structure. And then you see the children's bedrooms. I'm going to just enter the building very quickly. The mother can sit at the kitchen table, and then there is a series of sliding doors which you didn't see on the plans, which can slide in and out and connect all the spaces of the house. So these 4 small daughters, the mother can in fact live their life. They can live their life together during the day. So in a sense, the building gets constructed and reconstructed every day, depending on the social conditions that the family chooses to enact. Now the children are a bit, this is an old project, and now the children are a bit bigger, so I think that these sliding walls are not moving that much. The ability to understand architecture is very important. This is the moment when they moved into the house. These daughters drew a floor plan for us. So in fact, they tried to explain the house for us. This was a present from the family when they actually moved in, and this is maybe something that goes beyond the feeling of whether it's nice or right or not right, or whether the sofa is the right thing, or whether the light around the dining table is the exact one that you wanted, but it's the understanding of architecture that somehow makes it important. One daughter is working very much with the idea of the complete plan that she understands. She's 4 or 6 years old for it. And the other daughter is working very much with this idea of doors and the ability to have a real door. The third one is combining the two. This one is 6 years old, and we already have a plan and the complete understanding of the space of the building. So, if I try to switch a little bit to more peripheral programs also. There is always this funny program of a weekend house that we had to deal twice already in our career, and this is one such occasion. It's very near those hay racks that I was showing you. It's a national park, Triglav National Park. Triglav is the highest mountain in Slovenia, and here we were asked to replace this building. This building was well, basically falling apart, and because it's a national park, you can only replace it with 100% the same volume. This is the grandfather's house, and the owner who lives in Ljubljana wants to use it as a weekend house. So what we did, we had to follow exactly the shape of the building, but we also tried to play with this idea, the notion that these weekend houses are inhabited only for 2 days. And after that, they're just this kind of dust collecting things in the landscape that look like houses, but in fact never perform like houses. So we tried to create a house which would only be alive in the weekend, and then afterwards assume the idea of the mute object in the landscape. So the Friday afternoon when the owners come, the house can explode and in a way create a condition of a weekend house. We deliberately play with the idea the only added thing is the window that you see in the middle, which allows you to look out from your bed. The plan, which is very, very simple, some bedrooms on top and a living room at the bottom, and the house, which in fact, once uninhabited, looks a bit like the hay rack or a bit like a service building in the field, and once inhabited, opens up and also contains all the exterior spaces of the building. So it basically does not consume any of the landscape around it, it just exists on it and opens up and can be used for the weekend and then closed after that. So in a sense, the nature of this program, I think, of the weekend house is also in a way peripheral in relation to how our lives are happening today. The backside of the building with this include terrace, which is included into the volume of the building. So another peripheral location, I think I'm going to try and end with this one, is something that we did in Croatia a few years back, again for friends of ours, a weekend house again, something that is only used then for 2 or 3 months a year. It's on the island of Silba, in the middle of the island of Silba, but still only 2 minutes from the sea, where the friends of ours bought this wonderful old house. It was a captain's house, but it's a 19th century captain's house, completely falling apart, which we had to renovate, and to which we added a pavilion on the side. Why did we add anything to a building which is already good in itself? Because the idea of habitation in the 19th century was not the idea of habitation that we have today. Today, when you're on the coast, you're actually having your free time and you want to be outside. The people in the 19th century who built this house had the feeling that the house is a protected layer of the family. So in fact, they have no terraces, they have no outside spaces, so it's just basically a box. So we cleaned the entire ruin. We have to repair it, but it's basically, in very many ways, completely beyond repair. We add onto it a completely different construction in concrete, which we polish. It's hand-polished white concrete, and then clad with a different way of layering the exact same stones that we find on the site. So in a sense, the two constructions, one construction of the old house, which is basically just a cleaned facade and then filled in with the cement, and the other one which is a drywall, which is in fact the exact same material but put against the building in a way stimulating the idea of its, in a way, ephemerality, because only the surrounding walls are built in this kind of dry stone. The interior, of course, is all solid cast concrete and polished, so you have a different feeling once you enter. The building doesn't have rooms. It's a room it's just a roof. It's just a space, and then there is a small guest sleeping bedroom on the side of it. It's just a space to sit and enjoy the actually very, very old garden that surrounds the entire building. The guest bedroom, where the windows and doors were also sized to actually allow you to completely have the open air feeling within this construction. And then these two different modes of using the exact same material, one traditional, where you basically respectfully repair it, and one new, where you take something which exists there, because the surrounding wall of the side in the back that you see is made in the same dry stone, and construct with that. I'm not, and then of course, like the people that I showed the house is also functional like that. They are all different. They don't have to be the same. They don't have to belong to the same sensory universe. They don't, but they have to belong to the same kind of attitude and approach, and consider them. I'm going to stop here. Thanks. Thank you very much.